Hi, I'm Stollenwerk, and we will now look at concepts that help us spot and identify misinformation. One of the most important safeguards that protects us from misinformation is knowledge. Specifically, knowledge about how communication works in modern and technological communication channels. This knowledge makes it easier to critically evaluate sources and raises awareness of suspicious information. Generally, we humans are particularly receptive to certain types of information. Information that appeals to certain emotions, therefore, has an easier time than other information in our information overload. No wonder, then, that communication often focuses on emotions rather than facts. Focusing on emotions in communication is not wrong or problematic per se. In fact, communication is often all about that. Communication is the art of aiming at the heart but hit the head, is a well-known quote attributed to the publicist Vance Packard. In 1957, he wrote a book on the tricks of advertising entitled The Hidden Persuaders. Ultimately, this means that emotions play a role when it comes to processing information neurologically in the human brain. Packard's quote is not exactly scientific, but it's still very true, and it explains why misinformation often spreads rapidly. Highly emotionalized and emotionalizing information therefore has an easier time than pure facts, and this is not limited to the realm of commercial advertising. To an extent, it also applies to scientific information. There are other phenomena and rules of communication that can promote the spread of misinformation. Take the Barnum effect, for example. We encounter the Barnum effect in many places where misinformation plays a role. In conspiracy theories, for example. The Barnum effect describes the tendency of people to perceive very general and vague statements as personally applicable. These are statements that are almost impossible to refute. Think of mental health advice on social media. Here, the Barnum effect works because many statements about topics like ADHD, anxiety, or burnout are formulated in such a way that almost everyone can recognize themselves in them. Anyone who wants to find out about the symptoms of these conditions often finds that they may be affected. There are countless quick tests online for a wide variety of mental illnesses. Many of them serve commercial purposes, and surprisingly, you often end up feeling like you are in exactly the condition the test is about. When it comes to mental health, the following often applies. Truth is felt, not tested. That does not mean that mental illnesses are not real, but it shows how easily perception can be distorted. And then there is the confirmation bias. This means that people tend to seek out information that proves them right and ignore or dismiss contradictory information as less important. People prefer to read texts that support their own opinion. Counter-arguments are much more easily ignored, relativized, or dismissed as implausible. Ambiguous information is interpreted in a way that fits one's own view. Those who believe that a certain technology is dangerous tend to remember studies or news reports that emphasize the risks and overlook research that points out safety or benefits. The confirmation bias ensures that beliefs remain stable, not necessarily because they are correct, but because contradictory evidence is given less attention. Another crucial concept is the Dunning-Kruger effect. People with little knowledge of a subject often believe that they know a lot. This is because they lack the knowledge to recognize how much they do not know. Experts, on the other hand, are often more cautious because they understand the complexity. In short, little knowledge can lead to high self-confidence. And there is also an in-group bias. We tend to trust people who belong to us more than others. This can be our own field of research, our own political group, scene, nation, or community. We are quicker to believe that what our people say is right. In short, my group is right, the others are not. The so-called engagement bias is particularly relevant for communication on social media. Social media preferably shows us content that triggers a lot of reactions. It's a type of an algorithmic bias. Anger, fear, or outrage work particularly well in this context. Whether something is true is much less important for its visibility than the reaction to it. In short, what causes excitement is spread more widely, not what is correct. Often observed in television debates is the so-called false balance bias. The media presents two positions as equal, even though they are not. Sometimes simply because journalism aims to report in a balanced manner. A well-founded opinion is given the same amount of space as an unfounded one. This creates the impression that the truth is somewhere in the middle, even though that is not the case and the scientific evidence may be crystal clear. Think of debates about climate change. The science is very clear about the human impact of the climate, and still you'd find people sitting in public discussions with scientists who state the opposite. In short, unequal arguments appear to have equal weight. An interesting phenomenon is also known as familiarity backfire effect. When false statements are repeated, they seem familiar and are believed. Familiarity is easily confused with truth, and this also applies to corrections. Thus, correcting false information can unintentionally reinforce it. Quite a problem. In short, what you hear often feels true. In large online newsrooms that run several social media channels at once, the question sometimes arises, where should false reports be corrected? There is a risk that the correction will reach people who have not even noticed the false report in the first place. There are many such concepts, principles, and phenomena of communication, and they are important, because those who are aware of them can consciously or unconsciously draw upon them when it comes to assessing why dubious information spreads. And they can help us to recognize misinformation in the mass of information that reaches us. There is more and more information available to us. This makes verification all the more important. And this gives science, which creates knowledge, and journalists who report on it a special role to play. This role is changing dramatically. More and more often, the media must not only disseminate news, but also convince people that news are actually true. Nowadays, it is sometimes even necessary to prove that things are not AI. There is a great deal of uncertainty surrounding information. Here's a very unscientific example. When Justin Trudeau's term as Prime Minister of Canada ended in March 2025, a photo of him carrying a chair out of the Canadian Parliament went viral. In the photo, he was sticking out his tongue, and many people were certain that this must be an AI-generated photo. And the media reported that the photo was real in the end. Fact-checking units are not only necessary to debunk deepfakes, but also verify actual facts and photo evidence as real. No wonder, one might say. After all, there are now frequent warnings about misinformation and disinformation. This can also have negative consequences. When people are constantly warned about misinformation, they become skeptical and their trust in information in general suffers. At the same time, mistrust can also be a source of critical thinking and a protection against misinformation. Of course, there are different perspectives. You can always describe a glass as half empty or half full. There is also scientific evidence that shows that the spread of misinformation is a problem, but maybe not that dire as many may think. Misinformation is not everywhere. There are areas of the information landscape where you'd find a lot of misinformation, but then there's other areas where trustworthy information dominates. The authors of a 2024 communication psychology study argue that objectively and easily identifiable misinformation, typically referred to as fake news, represents only a small portion of the average person's information diet in Western societies. And also, people do still care about accuracy. Correctness of information is valued and desired by vast majorities. And people are good at recognizing falsehoods. A meta-study published 2025 in Nature Human Behavior found that people rated true news as more accurate than false news and were better at rating false news as false than at rating true news as true. In other words, participants were able to discern true from false news and erred on the side of skepticism rather than incredulity. And eventually, behavioral intervention against misinformation online does work. The public is not helpless in the face of deception. Research supported by the EU's Joint Research Centre shows that pre-bunking and debunking false information works and can slow down the spread of misinformation. Thank you for watching.